Hello, I'm Suzette Kuhn and I'm producing and directing Child Z. Child Z is an important new play because it's the first production to address the subject of child grooming and sexual exploitation in the UK. Just recently, the Children's Commissioner's inquiry into sexual exploitation by gangs and groups said that many people who should be protecting children from this crime remain in denial that it exists, which is why we think it's such an important production to happen.
Hello, my name's Sarah Heher and I wrote Child Z. I wrote the play in response to the arrest of 9 men in Rochdale in 2012. The men were found guilty of the grooming and sexual exploitation of young teenage girls. Although the details of the case were disturbing, it was something else that really captured my attention and made me very angry. After listening to the interview with one of the girls on Woman's Hour, I realised that these girls had spoken out and they'd given their evidence again and again, and they'd been ignored by the authorities that should have been there to protect them and to listen to them. It was this catalogue of indifference, this kind of hiding behind a bureaucracy, and it almost felt like a decision not to pursue their evidence that made me so angry and that made me passionate about writing this play and exploring how it was for these girls and how it felt to be in this position, to be so abused, so vulnerable, and yet so unprotected by those who should have been there to protect them.
So back in November we held a very successful industry reading for the play, and that gained us quite a lot of support, and we'd just like to show you a very short film of why those people came on board to support us.
Well, I think it's an incredibly powerful play, and it really raises the issue of how can we make sure that this doesn't ever happen again, and while Rochdale has finished, it is continuing to happen. And I think there are perhaps 2 ways that we can look at solving this problem, both of which are through education and awareness, and that's for children and young people and for adult professionals. In terms of adults, they need to understand that children are not responsible for the kind of things that happen to them with sexual exploitation. They need to understand that children who are sexually exploited are basically coming out of a war zone, and therefore they're not always likeable. They can be chaotic, they can be argumentative, they can be difficult to be with. But we must not forget that they are children, and we have a moral and a professional responsibility to look after them and to take care of them.
I think some of the alerts were ignored because the young people didn't present themselves as a comfortable victim. And what I mean by that is that services found it very difficult to approach those young people and get a reasonable assessment of what was going on. Services at that time really needed evidence from the young person themselves, and if that young person wasn't very forthcoming and didn't find it easy enough to talk to a police officer or to a social worker, that felt as though that was a good enough reason for those services to not take that any further. They were seen as being non-compliant or not engaging with services, so that felt as though that was enough for those services to stop and pull out. It seemed to not make any difference that the evidence was really clear, and the evidence was really clear there because they told us. They'd made those disclosures. The disclosures were written down comprehensively. The evidence was really clear and it was there. We had a trusting relationship with some of those young people that meant that they were able to tell their story. Unfortunately, that never seemed to be enough for statutory agencies. That was really frustrating. That was very difficult. I think ultimately services have to be accessible for young people. They have to be able to be seen to be approachable. and that young people feel as though those services will believe them, and that young people have confidence that the services that are designed to protect and offer safety are going to do exactly that, that they're going to believe young people and act appropriately to make sure that they don't come to any harm.
I tried to chivvy people along to reach the conclusion that it was a subject that should be inquired into. So I took part in a debate on child sex abuse, which I talked about the Rochdale grooming case. I also met on an individual basis with Keith Vaz, the chairman of the Select Committee, Home Affairs Select Committee, and sort of lobbied him in terms of who he should call as witnesses. It's down for the committee to make decisions on that, but I was trying to influence their thinking around this subject. If there's one overall lesson to be learned from any of this case, it is that we need to listen to children. And that's where there was a failure. Police officers failing to listen to children, social workers failing to listen to children, parents sometimes failing to listen to lots of different people, politicians not listening to children. That's what we need to do ultimately, is when children are speaking to us, listen to what they have to say and then act on it.
If you could support us to help us get this play made, then we'd really appreciate it if you could make a pledge, and if not, please spread the word.
Thank you for listening.